The meeting chamber stretched across half a kilometer of polished crystal. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the entrance and felt her stomach tighten. 47 different species filled the seats above her, their eyes, sensors, and other strange organs all focused on her small human delegation. Sarah had studied the Galactic Council for years. She knew their history. They had kept peace for 12,000 years. They did this through careful compromises and trade agreements. Every species that joined them followed their rules. Every species bent to their will, until today, perhaps. The human delegation walked down the long pathway to the speaking platform. Their footsteps echoed in the massive chamber. Sarah could hear whispers from above. The translators in her ear turned alien sounds into words. Most of them were not kind, primitive, aggressive, reckless. These were the words the older species used for humans. Humanity had discovered faster than light travel only 200 years ago. That made them babies in galactic terms. The youngest species before humans had been traveling the stars for over 1,000 years. But humans did not act like children. They expanded fast. They built colonies on dozens of worlds. They claimed territories that other species wanted. This worried the Council. It worried them very much. Senior Counselor Vexthar rose from his seat. He was a saurian, one of the founding species. His scales gleamed under the chamber lights. His long tail swayed behind him as he spoke. Ambassador Chen, his voice boomed through the chamber. Humanity has been summoned to address serious concerns. Your expansion threatens established borders. Your resource consumption exceeds acceptable levels. Your military buildup disturbs the peace we have maintained for millennia. Sarah reached the platform. She looked up at the thousands of beings watching her. She took a breath. "We hear your concerns, Counselor," she said. Her voice was calm and steady. "Please share your proposals." Vexthar's eyes narrowed. He was not used to such directness from younger species. They usually apologized first. They promised to do better. They begged for mercy. "The Council has prepared terms for humanity," he said. "First, you will halt all expansion beyond your current territories. Second, you will accept resource quotas determined by the Council. Third, you will reduce your military forces to levels appropriate for a species of your age. Fourth, you will accept guidance from senior species in matters of governance and technology." The chamber fell silent. Every species in the Council knew what came next. The humans would try to negotiate. They would ask for better terms. They would make counteroffers. Eventually, they would agree to most of what the Council demanded. This is how it always worked. The Council had done this hundreds of times before. Some species resisted at first, but they all gave in. The unified pressure of 47 civilizations was too much for any single species to withstand. The Council had never failed to bring a species into line. Sarah looked at the datapad in her hand. She had spent weeks preparing different negotiation strategies. She had proposals for partial compromises. She had alternative suggestions. She had carefully worded responses that would allow both sides to save face. She turned off the datapad. She looked directly at Vexthar. "No," she said. The single word hit the chamber like a physical blow. Silence stretched for several seconds. Then chaos erupted. Dozens of species began shouting at once. The translator in Sarah's ear struggled to keep up. She heard words like outrageous, suicidal, and insane mixed with hisses, clicks, and sounds she had no words for. Vexthar slammed his hand on his desk. The sound echoed through the chamber. The noise slowly died down. "No?" he repeated. His voice was dangerous now. "You misunderstand, Ambassador. This is not a negotiation. This is the Council informing you of decisions already made. Every species before you has accepted Council authority." "You have no choice," Sarah smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "You're wrong, Counselor. We do have a choice, and we choose to reject your terms. All of them, completely." She pulled out another datapad. This one had different information on it. "We have studied your Council carefully," she continued. "For 12,000 years you have maintained peace. But what kind of peace? It is the peace of stagnation. The elder species control all the best territories. You control access to the most valuable resources. You decide which technologies can be developed. You grow fat and comfortable while younger species struggle under quotas and restrictions." Angry shouts erupted again, but Sarah noticed something. Some of the younger species were not shouting. They were listening. Humanity did not claw its way up from Earth to beg permission to exist, Sarah said, her voice rising. We fought through world wars. We survived nuclear weapons. We nearly destroyed our own planet learning how to work together. We earned our place among the stars through blood and sacrifice. We will not surrender our freedom to a council that values order over justice. Vexthar's scales flushed dark red. That was a sign of extreme anger in Saurians. Then you choose conflict, he said. The council will implement sanctions immediately. No species will trade with you. No port will accept your ships. You will be isolated and alone. Your colonies will starve. Your economy will collapse. You will come crawling back within months, begging us to accept you on any terms. Sarah began walking back toward the exit. Her delegation followed. She stopped at the doorway and turned back. You misunderstand humanity, counselor, she said. We have been isolated before. We have been told we cannot survive. We have faced impossible odds. And we are still here. Your sanctions do not frighten us. They prove we were right to refuse you. She touched her communicator. Her voice broadcast across every channel, to every species in the galaxy. This is Ambassador Sarah Chen of Earth. I speak for all humanity. The Galactic Council has demanded we surrender our sovereignty. They want us to accept quotas on our growth. They want us to reduce our defenses. They want us to become subjects, not equals. Humanity rejects these demands. We will not negotiate our freedom. We will not bargain away our future. To any species watching this broadcast, we offer free trade and mutual respect. To the Council, we say this. We will defend our rights by any means necessary. The transmission ended. Sarah looked at Vexthar one last time. The Council has maintained peace for 12,000 years, she said quietly. But perhaps the galaxy does not need your peace anymore. The human delegation left the chamber. Behind them, the Council exploded into argument. Some species demanded immediate military action. Others called for patience. A few mostly younger species said nothing at all, but they were thinking. Sarah walked back to the human ship in orbit. Her hands were shaking. She had just made a choice that could lead to war. She had refused the most powerful alliance in the galaxy. She had gambled the future of her entire species. But she had also spoken truth. Humanity would not kneel. Not to the Council. Not to anyone. On Earth, the broadcast played on every screen. In human colonies across dozens of worlds, people watched their ambassador defy the galaxy. Some were afraid. Some were angry. But most felt something they had not felt in a long time. Pride. The military began moving to defensive positions. Supply lines were reinforced. Diplomats reached out to species that might be sympathetic. Engineers worked on new weapons. Scientists pushed harder on advanced technologies. Humanity had declared its independence. Now it had to prove it could survive the consequences. Back in the council chamber, Vexisthar stared at the empty doorway where the humans had stood. He felt something he had not felt in centuries. Uncertainty. In 12,000 years, no species had ever simply said no. No negotiation. No compromise. Just refusal. He looked around the chamber. The council was supposed to be unified, but he saw cracks forming. Some species looked thoughtful. Others looked uncertain. A few looked almost admiring. The humans had done more than refuse. They had asked a question that echoed in the minds of every species present. What if the council's peace was not peace at all? What if it was just control? Vexthar pushed the thought away. The council would crush this rebellion. They had the numbers. They had the resources. They had the experience. But as he looked at the divided council around him, he felt that uncertainty grow stronger. The humans had been in space for only 200 years. How dangerous could they possibly be? He would soon find out. The sanctions began within hours. The council moved with impressive speed when they wanted to. Port authorities across the galaxy received their orders. No human ships would be allowed to dock. No trade with human colonies. No exceptions. Human merchant vessels found themselves turned away from stations they had visited for decades. Cargo ships full of food and supplies sat in space, unable to deliver their goods. Mining operations ground to a halt as their products had nowhere to go. The council expected humanity to panic. They expected emergency messages begging for mercy. They expected Sarah Chen to return with apologies and acceptance of their terms. That is not what happened. Instead, Human colonies activated contingency plans that had been prepared for months. Trade routes shifted to connect human worlds directly. Ships that had been turned away from alien ports simply traveled to other human stations instead. Resources were shared between colonies. Rationing began, but it was orderly and calm. Humanity had expected sanctions. They had planned for them. On Earth, President Maria Santos addressed the people. Her speech was broadcast to every human world. The Galactic Council believes that isolation will break us. They think we cannot survive without their approval. They are wrong. Humanity has faced worse than trade sanctions. We have survived ice ages and plagues. We have rebuilt from world wars and near extinction. We will survive this too. The speech had an effect that surprised many observers. Instead of fear, it created unity. Human colonies that had competed with each other suddenly cooperated. Political parties that had argued for years found common ground. The threat from outside made humanity remember what it meant to stand together. Back in the council chamber, Vexthar called for an emergency session. The sanctions had been in place for 2 weeks. He expected to share news of human surrender. Instead, his intelligence officer delivered a troubling report. The humans are not collapsing, Counselor. Their economy has adjusted. Their colonies are functioning normally. In fact, some reports suggest their production has actually increased. Vexthar's tail lashed in frustration. How is this possible? No species can survive complete isolation from galactic trade. The intelligence officer hesitated. It appears the humans have been preparing for this scenario for some time. They built redundant supply lines. They stockpiled essential materials. They designed their colonies to be self-sufficient if necessary. Then we increase the pressure, Vexthar decided. Send a fleet to their largest colony, New Horizon. We will not attack, but we will show them the consequences of continued defiance. The decision passed with strong support from the elder species. A few younger species voted against it, but not enough to matter. The council would send a message that could not be ignored. The peacekeeping fleet assembled over the next month. 500 ships from 12 different species. It was an impressive sight. The largest fleet the council had gathered in over 4,000 years. Commander Thelros, a veteran officer from the Vryn species, led the fleet. He had overseen ceremonial displays before, but never anything this large. He felt uneasy about the mission. The Vryn were feline warriors, proud and honorable. Thelros did not like the idea of threatening a species that had done nothing except refuse to surrender their independence. But he followed his orders. That was what good soldiers did. The fleet jumped into the New Horizon system with maximum visibility. They wanted the humans to see them coming. They wanted to create fear. New Horizon was humanity's pride. A colony of over 10 million people, orbital factories, agricultural stations. It was everything humanity hoped to build across the galaxy. Admiral Marcus Okonkwo commanded the human defense fleet. He had 73 ships. Compared to the Council's 500, it seemed hopeless. Marcus stood on the bridge of the destroyer Defiance and watched the Council fleet arrive. His tactical officer gave him the numbers. 500 ships, Admiral. Mixed classes. Their capital ships outweigh ours 3 to 1. Marcus nodded slowly. He had expected something like this. All ships, defensive formation. Lock weapons but do not fire. Let's see what they want. Commander Thelros opened a communication channel to the human fleet. Human vessels, this is Commander Thelros of the Galactic Council Peacekeeping Force. You are ordered to power down your weapons and allow Council representatives to land on New Horizon. Your government has defied Council authority. This cannot be allowed to continue. Marcus took his time responding. He studied the Council formation. They were spread out trying to look impressive, but their spacing was poor. They had too many gaps. It was the formation of a fleet that had not seen real combat in millennia. Commander Thelros, this is Admiral Marcus Okonkwo. New Horizon is a sovereign human colony. We do not recognize Council authority here. I strongly suggest you withdraw your fleet while you still can. There was a long pause. Then Thelros spoke again, and Marcus could hear confusion in his voice. Admiral, you have 73 ships. We have 500. Do you really believe you can resist us? Commander, Marcus said quietly. I don't believe anything, I know. Your fleet is large but poorly organized. Your ships are designed for shows of force, not actual combat. Your crews have never faced a real enemy. I really do not want to destroy you. Please leave. Thelros felt insulted. The human admiral was lecturing him? Him? A commander with 40 years of experience? This was unacceptable. You leave us no choice, Admiral. All ships target the uninhabited moon in this system. We will demonstrate the consequences of defiance. 100 Council ships fired their weapons at the same time. Energy beams lanced across space. The moon's surface erupted in massive explosions. When the dust cleared, a crater 10 kilometers wide scarred the surface. Delros opened the channel again. That was a demonstration. Next time, we will not target a moon. Surrender now and avoid bloodshed. On the Defiance's bridge, Marcus made his decision. He had tried to warn them. He had given them a chance to leave. They had chosen violence. All ships, weapons free. Execute attack pattern Delta 7. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations. The human fleet moved as one unit. They did not spread out. They concentrated their force and dove straight into the Council formation. Their ships were smaller and faster. They slipped through the gaps in the Council line like knives. Council shields were designed to stop energy weapons. They were very good at it. But humanity had developed something different. Kinetic weapons. Physical projectiles that moved at incredible speeds. Missiles that could overwhelm point defenses through sheer numbers. The first salvo hit the Council fleet like a hammer. Shields that had never failed before suddenly meant nothing. Metal slugs punched through hulls. Missiles swarmed around Council ships, detonating against their armor. Delros watched in horror as 3 of his capital ships disappeared in explosions. His tactical display lit up with damage reports. Ships were calling for help. Crews were abandoning damaged vessels. All ships return fire. Return fire. The Council fleet tried to respond, but they were confused. They had trained for elegant battles at long range. They had practiced formations and coordinated strikes. They had never faced an enemy that simply charged into their midst and started shooting. The human fleet moved with purpose and coordination. They had studied every Council ship type. They knew where the weak points were. They attacked with precision and ruthlessness. Marcus watched the battle unfold exactly as his staff had predicted. The Council fleet was impressive when standing still, but in actual combat they were slow and clumsy. Their commanders hesitated. Their crews panicked. Humanity had spent centuries fighting itself. They had developed warfare into a science. The human military had fought wars that killed millions. They had learned lessons written in blood. The Council had kept the peace for 12,000 years. But peace had made them weak. 47 minutes after the first shot, Commander Delros ordered his fleet to retreat. He had lost 189 ships. Another 70 were too damaged to fight. The rest fled back toward Council space. The human fleet had lost 12 ships. Marcus did not pursue. He had made his point. More importantly, he did not want to turn a defensive victory into an aggressive war. Humanity needed to be seen as defenders, not conquerors. As the Council ships jumped away, Marcus opened a channel. He broadcast to every survivor, to all Council personnel. Take this message back to your leaders. Humanity does not want war. We want to be left alone. We will defend ourselves, but we will not attack unless attacked first. Tell the Council that their choice is simple. Accept us as equals or leave us alone. But if you come to threaten our people again, the result will be the same. The transmission ended. The human fleet returned to defensive positions around New Horizon. The colony below erupted in celebrations. They had stood against the galaxy and won. The news of the battle spread across the galaxy within days. The report seemed impossible. A fleet of 73 ships defeating 500? Primitive humans crushing experienced Council forces? But the evidence was undeniable. Survivors told the same story. The humans fought like nothing the Council had ever seen. Fast, brutal, and effective. In the Council chamber, Vexthar faced angry questions from all sides. How had this happened? How could the peacekeeping fleet fail so completely? The emergency council session lasted 3 days. Vexthar had never seen such disorder. Species that had worked together for thousands of years now shouted at each other. Accusations flew across the chamber like weapons. The elder species demanded full military mobilization. They wanted to gather every ship in Council space and crush humanity once and for all. They saw the defeat at New Horizon as a temporary setback. Nothing more, the younger species had different ideas. They questioned whether attacking humanity was wise. They pointed out that the humans had only defended themselves. They had not pursued the fleeing Council fleet. They had offered peace terms. Perhaps some suggested the council should accept those terms. Vexthar felt his control slipping away. For 12,000 years, the council had spoken with one voice. Now that voice was breaking into dozens of different opinions. The unity that had been their strength was disappearing. While the council argued, humanity was busy. Ambassador Chen had not been idle since the battle. She knew that military victory meant nothing if humanity remained isolated. They needed allies, or at least they needed to break the council's unity. Her team had identified several species that seemed unhappy with council policies, species that had been restricted by quotas, species that felt ignored by the elder members, species that wanted change but had been too afraid to speak up. Now humanity offered them something they had not had before, a choice. The first species to respond was the Javine Collective. They were insectoids organized in massive hive structures. They had joined the council 2,000 years ago. Since then, they had been limited in how much they could expand. The elder species worried about their rapid reproduction rates. A Javine diplomat arrived at Earth Station 1 under cover of darkness. The meeting was secret. If the council found out, there would be consequences. Queen Speaker Dazix represented the collective. She met with Sarah Chen in a private conference room. Ambassador Chen, Tizix said through her translator, "My people have watched your defiance with great interest. For 2,000 years we have accepted council restrictions. We believed we had no choice. You have shown us that choice exists." Sarah chose her words carefully. "The Javine Collective has contributed much to the galaxy. You deserve to grow and prosper without artificial limits. Humanity believes in free trade and mutual respect. We would be honored to establish relations with your people. What do you offer that the council does not?" Tizix asked. "Freedom," Sarah said simply. "We offer the freedom to expand at your own pace, to trade without restrictions, to make your own decisions. We ask only for fair dealing in return." The Queen Speaker was silent for a long moment. Then she made a decision that would change the galaxy. "The Javine Collective will sign a non-aggression pact with humanity. We will not participate in council military actions against your species. In exchange, we request access to human trade routes and technology sharing agreements." Sarah smiled. "Agreed. Let us draft the terms." News of the Javine agreement reached the council chamber 2 days later. The reaction was explosive. The Javine had broken ranks. They had negotiated with the humans without council approval. This was unprecedented. Vexthar demanded that the Javine withdraw from the agreement immediately. The Queen Speaker's response was broadcast across the galaxy. "The Javine Collective has acted in its own interests. We signed a peaceful agreement with another sovereign species. This is not a violation of council law. It is an exercise of our rights as an independent civilization." The legal argument was sound. The council had no law against peaceful treaties with non-member species. They had never needed such a law before. Everyone had always deferred to council authority. But now the precedent was set. Other species began to wonder. If the Javine could negotiate with humans, why could they not? The second species to reach out to humanity surprised everyone. The Vryn had already withdrawn from military actions against humans. But now they went further. Commander Thelros himself came to Earth. He walked through human cities and saw something that moved him. He saw humans working together. He saw them building and creating. He saw a young species with fire in their hearts. He met with Admiral Marcus Okonkwo. The two warriors sat together and spoke honestly. "You defeated my fleet," Thelros said. "You could have destroyed us completely. But you let us go. Why?" Marcus poured them both drinks. "Because we are not monsters, Commander. We fought because we had to. We stopped because we chose to. We wanted to send a message. Humanity can defend itself, but we do not seek conquest. The Vryn value honor above all else," Thelros said. "What you did was honorable. You fought with courage and skill. You showed mercy to defeated enemies. These are the actions of warriors we can respect." He stood and gave a formal salute. "The Vryn Confederacy wishes to establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity. We will not stand against you. And if others attack you without cause, they may find the Vryn standing beside you instead." Marcus returned the salute. "We would be honored to call the Vryn our friends." The alliance with the Vryn changed everything. The Vryn were warriors respected throughout the galaxy. If they sided with humanity, others would follow, and they did. Over the next month, 3 more species signed agreements with humanity. Small species, ones that had little voice in council decisions, But each agreement was another crack in Council unity. The Council tried to maintain control. They passed resolutions condemning the treaties. They threatened sanctions against species that dealt with humans. But the threats rang hollow. The Council had already tried sanctions against humanity. Those sanctions had failed. More importantly, the younger species were no longer afraid. They saw that the Council's power came from unity. When unity broke, power disappeared. Human intelligence services worked overtime during this period. They discovered something interesting. Several elder species had been hoarding advanced technologies. They had kept new discoveries secret, preventing younger species from accessing them. This maintained the elder species' technological advantage. Sarah Chen released this information publicly. She did not editorialize. She simply presented the facts. The data showed clear patterns of technology suppression. The reaction was immediate. Younger species felt betrayed. They had trusted the Council to share knowledge fairly. Now they learned that trust had been misplaced. Protests erupted on dozens of worlds. Species that had been quiet for centuries suddenly found their voices. They demanded answers. They demanded change. They demanded fairness. The Council chamber became a battlefield. Elder species tried to maintain control. Younger species demanded reform. Moderate voices called for compromise. Radical voices called for dissolution of the Council entirely. Vexthar watched his life's work crumbling around him. He had dedicated centuries to maintaining Council unity. He had believed in the system. He had thought that the Council's peace was worth any price. Now he wondered if he had been wrong. A delegation of moderate species approached him privately. They included representatives from both elder and younger civilizations. They had a proposal. Councillor Vexthar, their spokesperson, said, "The old system is dying. We can fight to preserve it and tear the galaxy apart, or we can adapt and build something better. Humanity has proven they cannot be forced to submit. Perhaps it is time to try a different approach." "What approach?" Vexthar asked, though he feared he knew the answer. "Negotiation. Real negotiation, not dictation. We propose forming a delegation to meet with the humans, not to demand their surrender, but to discuss a new framework for galactic cooperation, one based on equality rather than hierarchy." Vexthar felt very old suddenly. He looked around at the faces watching him. They were waiting for his response. His decision would shape the future of the galaxy. He thought about the battle reports from New Horizon. He thought about the species abandoning the Council. He thought about the protests spreading across dozens of worlds. He thought about 12,000 years of peace maintained through control. Perhaps that peace had come at too high a price. "Very well," he said quietly. "Form your delegation. I will support this initiative. But know this. If the humans use these negotiations to weaken us further, I will not hesitate to recommend military action again." The moderates accepted his terms. They had no choice. They needed his support to make the proposal legitimate. The next council session was different from all those before. Instead of demands and threats, there was discussion. Instead of unanimity, there was debate. It was messy and uncomfortable, but it was also more honest than the council had been in centuries. The resolution passed by a narrow margin. The council would send a delegation to Earth, not to demand submission, but to negotiate a new relationship, one based on mutual respect. 12 species voted against the resolution. They were the oldest members, the ones who remembered when the council ruled absolutely. They saw negotiation as weakness. They predicted disaster, but 23 species voted in favor. And 12 species announced they were leaving the council entirely. They would form their own coalition with humanity at its center. The Galactic Council had fractured. The unified voice that had ruled for 12,000 years had broken into 3 distinct groups. The Old Guard, clinging to their traditional power, the Reformists trying to adapt to new realities. The council delegation arrived on Earth 2 weeks later. 5 ships descended through the atmosphere toward Geneva, where the summit would take place. The city had been chosen deliberately. It had a long history of international diplomacy. It seemed fitting. Ambassador Chen stood at the landing site watching the ships arrive. She recognized the designs. 3 ships from Reformist species, 1 from the Old Guard, and 1 Vryn vessel there as neutral observers. The lead negotiator surprised her. It was Vexthar himself. The old Saurian walked down the ramp slowly, his age showing in his movements. Sarah had expected the council to send someone else, someone who had not been so opposed to humanity. But perhaps that was the point. If Vexithar could negotiate with humans, anyone could. She walked forward to greet him. They stood facing each other for a long moment. The last time they had met, Sarah had refused his demands. The time before that, Vexithar had threatened her species with destruction. "Counselor Vexithar," Sarah said formally. "Welcome to Earth." "Ambassador Chen," he replied. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." The first negotiating session began the next morning. The room was carefully arranged. No species sat higher than another. The table was round with no head position. These small details mattered. Vexithar opened the proceedings. "The Galactic Council has maintained order for 12,000 years. That order is now threatened, not by external enemies, but by internal division. Humanity has shown us that the old ways are no longer sustainable. We are here to discuss new ways." He paused and looked directly at Sarah. "I do not agree with everything that has happened. I still believe that humanity's rapid expansion was reckless. But I also recognize that our response was flawed. We treated you as subjects to be controlled, not as equals to be respected. This was a mistake." The admission surprised everyone in the room. Vexithar was known for his pride. For him to acknowledge error was significant. Sarah nodded. "Humanity appreciates that acknowledgement. We also recognize that we are young, and sometimes act without full understanding of galactic politics. We have much to learn, but we will not learn as subjects. We will learn as partners." A representative from the Palexian Combine spoke next. They were a younger species, one of the reformists. "The question before us is simple. How do we create a framework that allows for both stability and freedom? The old council provided stability through control, but that control stifled growth and innovation. We need something different." The negotiations lasted for 3 weeks. They were difficult. The species involved had very different views on governance, but they all shared one common goal. They wanted to avoid war. The breakthrough came during the second week. Sarah proposed a new structure. Instead of one council that ruled everything, there would be multiple levels of cooperation. Species could choose their level of involvement. At the core would be basic principles: no aggression without cause, peaceful resolution of disputes, protection of sentient rights. These principles would be mandatory for all participants. Beyond that, species could join economic unions, defense pacts, research collaborations, or any other agreements they chose. But nothing would be mandatory. Nothing would be imposed from above. The proposal was radical. It meant giving up central control. It meant accepting that the galaxy would be messier and less predictable. It meant trusting species to make their own decisions. Vexithar studied the proposal for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "This system has risks. Without central authority, conflicts may arise that we cannot control. Species may make choices that harm themselves or others. There will be chaos." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "There will be risks. There will be conflicts. But there will also be freedom. And freedom means responsibility. Species will learn from their mistakes. They will grow. They will adapt. That is how humanity has survived. Through trial and error, not through imposed order." "The Vrins support this proposal," Commander Thelros announced. "We value the freedom to make our own choices. We will stand with those who embrace this new path." One by one, the other delegates added their support. The reformist species agreed quickly. Even some moderates from the old guard found themselves nodding. Vexithar was the last to speak. He looked around the room at faces from dozens of different species. He thought about everything that had happened: the failed sanctions, the disastrous battle, the fracturing of the council he had served his entire life. "I am old," he said finally. "I have lived through 12,000 years of council peace. I believed in that peace. I still do. But perhaps the humans are right. Perhaps that peace had become stagnation. Perhaps it is time for something new." He looked at Sarah. "The Saurian delegation will support this proposal. But know this, Ambassador Chen. If this new system fails, if it leads to war and chaos, history will judge us harshly." "History will judge us regardless," Sarah replied. "The question is whether we tried to build something better or clung to something broken." The framework they created became known as the Nexus Accords. It was named after Nexus Prime, the world where the Galactic Council had met for millennia. The name was deliberate. It honored the past while building the future. The Nexus Accords established several key principles. First, no species could veto another species' sovereignty. Each civilization had the right to govern itself and make its own decisions. Second, disputes would be resolved through mediation, not force. Third, trade and cooperation would be encouraged but never mandatory. Most importantly, the Accords created a new decision-making process. Instead of requiring unanimous agreement, decisions needed only majority support. And any species could opt out of decisions that affected only themselves. It was not perfect. It had flaws and gaps, but it was a start. 23 species signed the Nexus Accords in the first week. These were the reformists and moderates, species that wanted change but feared complete chaos. They saw the Accords as a middle path between the old council and complete independence. 12 species refused to sign. These were the Old Guard, the elder civilizations that saw any compromise as weakness. They announced they would continue the Galactic Council in its original form. Any species that wished to maintain traditional values could join them. The remaining 12 species formed their own coalition with humanity. They called themselves the Free Trade Alliance. Their charter was simple: open borders, free exchange of goods and ideas, mutual defense against aggression, and absolute respect for sovereignty. The galaxy now had 3 major power blocks instead of 1. The Old Council, diminished but still influential. The Nexus Accords nations, trying to balance freedom and cooperation. And the Free Trade Alliance, embracing change and growth. Some observers predicted immediate war. Others forecast economic collapse. A few optimistic voices suggested that competition between the 3 systems would drive innovation and improvement. The first year proved the pessimists wrong and the optimists right. The 3 blocks did not fight. Instead, they competed. The Old Council tried to demonstrate that their traditional ways were superior. The Nexus nations worked to prove that reformed governance could succeed. The Free Trade Alliance showed the benefits of unrestricted cooperation. Species began moving between the blocks. Some left the Old Council for the Nexus Accords. Others joined the Free Trade Alliance. A few even returned to the Old Council, preferring its stability to the uncertainties of change. But the movement was mostly in one direction. Younger species embraced the new systems. They saw opportunities that had been denied to them for centuries. They expanded into territories that had been restricted. They developed technologies that had been suppressed. They thrived. The Old Council grew smaller and more isolated. Some of its members began to question whether their traditional approach still made sense. If everyone else was changing, could they really remain the same? Vexthar watched these changes from his home world. He had retired from active politics after the Geneva summit. But he still followed galactic news closely. He saw the old order he had defended his entire life slowly fading away. Part of him mourned. The Council had maintained peace for 12,000 years. That was an achievement worth honoring. But another part of him, a part he had not listened to in centuries, felt something else. Hope. The galaxy was louder now, more chaotic, more unpredictable. But it was also more alive. Species that had been quiet for millennia found their voices. Civilizations that had stagnated began growing again. New ideas spread quickly. New technologies emerged constantly. It was messy and sometimes frightening. But it was also exciting in a way the galaxy had not been for a very long time. Sarah Chen returned to her role as Earth's ambassador to the Nexus Accords. She found the work exhausting but rewarding. Every day brought new challenges. Every week required solving problems that had never existed before. But she also saw progress. Species that had been enemies for centuries learned to cooperate. Trade flourished across all 3 blocks despite their differences. New colonies opened on worlds that had been empty for millennia. The galaxy was expanding again, growing in ways it had not for ages. One day, Vexthar sent her a private message. It was brief but meaningful. Ambassador Chen, I wanted you to know that I have been watching the changes in the galaxy. I do not agree with all of them. But I can no longer deny that change was necessary. 5 years after the signing of the Nexus Accords, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. The changes were visible everywhere. New trade routes connected worlds that had never communicated before. Technologies that had been restricted for centuries spread freely. Species that had been limited in their growth now expanded rapidly. The 3 power blocks had settled into an uneasy but functional coexistence. The old council still existed, though it had shrunk to just 8 species. They maintained their traditional ways and their belief in central authority. Most other species viewed them as relics of the past, but they had their supporters. The Nexus Accords nations had grown to 29 members. They represented the moderate path, trying to balance freedom with cooperation. Their system was complicated and sometimes inefficient, but it worked well enough to satisfy most participants. The Free Trade Alliance had become the largest bloc with 19 members. New species joined every few months, attracted by the promise of unrestricted growth and opportunity. Humanity remained at the center of this alliance, though they shared leadership with the Vryn and several other influential species. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the observation window of Unity Station, the new diplomatic hub built in neutral space. The station served all 3 blocks, providing a place where representatives could meet without favoring any particular system. She watched ships from dozens of species arriving and departing. Human vessels flew alongside Vryn warships. Javan colony ships passed Palexian merchant convoys. The traffic was constant and chaotic. It was beautiful. Thinking about how far we have come? A familiar voice asked. Sarah turned to see Commander Thelros, now Admiral Thelros of the Vryn Defense Fleet. He had become one of her closest friends in the years since the battle at New Horizon. Always, she replied. 5 years ago, we were facing economic sanctions and military threats. Now look at this. Species from all 3 blocks working together, even when their governments disagree. Thelros nodded. The politicians argue, but the people cooperate. Perhaps that is how it should be. They walked together through the station. Everywhere they looked, they saw evidence of the new galactic order. Human restaurants served food to alien customers. Vryn engineers worked with Javine technicians. Students from a dozen species studied together in the station's educational center. Have you heard the news from the old council? Thelros asked. Sarah nodded. The Denari are considering leaving. That would leave only 7 species. The old guard is dying, Thelros said, not because anyone destroyed them, but because their system cannot compete with freedom. Sarah felt sympathy for those who remained in the old council. They had dedicated their lives to that system. They truly believed it was the best way to maintain peace. Watching it crumble must have been painful, but she also knew that change was necessary. The old peace had been built on suppression and control. The new galaxy, chaotic as it was, offered something more valuable: choice. That evening, Sarah attended a dinner hosted by the Nexus Accords members. Representatives from all 29 species gathered in Unity Station's largest conference hall. The atmosphere was relaxed and friendly. Vexthar was there as well. He had come out of retirement to serve as a special advisor to the Nexus nations. His experience and wisdom were valued even by those who disagreed with his past decisions. He approached Sarah during the reception. They had spoken many times since the Geneva summit, but their relationship remained formal and respectful rather than warm. Ambassador Chen, he greeted her, I wanted to share some news. The Saurian government has decided to leave the old council. We will be applying for membership in the Nexus Accords. Sarah felt genuine surprise. The Saurians were one of the founding species of the original Galactic Council. They had ruled for thousands of years. For them to abandon that system was extraordinary. That is significant news, Counselor, she said. May I ask what changed? Vexthar smiled slightly. The same thing that always changes minds. Evidence. We have watched the 3 blocks compete for 5 years. We have seen which systems produce prosperity and which produce stagnation. The conclusion is difficult to deny. The old ways no longer serve the galaxy well. He paused and looked around the room at species from so many different worlds talking and laughing together. More than that, we have seen something we did not expect. The old council maintained peace through control, but you have maintained peace through respect. That is a better foundation. Sarah raised her glass. To new beginnings, Counselor. Vexthar raised his own glass. To new beginnings, and to the species that showed us they were possible. News of the Saurian decision spread quickly. Within a month, 3 more species left the old council to join either the Nexus Accords or the Free Trade Alliance. The original Galactic Council, which had ruled for 12,000 years, was down to just 4 member species. Those 4 species held an emergency meeting. They faced a choice. They could continue as they were, maintaining their principles even as the galaxy moved on without them, or they could adapt, joining one of the new systems. The debate lasted for days. In the end, pragmatism won over pride. The 4 remaining species voted to dissolve the old council. 3 would join the Nexus Accords. 1 would join the Free Trade Alliance. The Galactic Council held its final session on Nexus Prime. The same chamber where they had once threatened humanity now hosted their farewell. Representatives from all former member species attended to witness the end of an era. Vexthar gave the closing address. His voice was strong despite his age. For 12,000 years, the Galactic Council maintained peace across the galaxy. This was an achievement to be proud of. We prevented wars. We facilitated trade. We helped dozens of species navigate the challenges of spacefaring civilization. He paused and looked around the chamber. But we also made mistakes. We confused peace with control. We mistook stability for justice. We feared change, and in doing so, we prevented growth. When humanity challenged us, we responded with threats rather than listening. We were wrong. The council is ending, but its legacy continues. The lessons we learned, both good and bad, will shape the new galactic order. We pass the responsibility of maintaining peace to the younger systems. May they do better than we did. May they remember that peace built on respect is stronger than peace built on fear. The chamber fell silent. Then slowly, the assembled representatives began to applaud. They applauded not just for what the council had been, but for having the courage to acknowledge when it was time to change. Sarah attended the ceremony as a representative of the Free Trade Alliance. She felt mixed emotions watching the council's end. Part of her was glad to see the old system disappear, but part of her mourned the loss of something that had once served the galaxy well. After the ceremony, she walked through the empty council chamber. She stood at the spot where she had once faced down the entire galaxy, where she had said no to their demands, where she had gambled humanity's future on the belief that freedom was worth fighting for. She had been terrified that day. Terrified that she was making the wrong choice. Terrified that her refusal would lead to war and destruction. Terrified that history would remember her as the person who destroyed galactic peace. But she had been right to refuse. Not because humanity was perfect, not because their way was the only way, but because no species should have to surrender their freedom to gain acceptance. Admiral Marcus Okonkwo found her there. The old warrior had become humanity's representative to the Nexus Accords Military Committee. He understood both peace and war better than most. Thinking about the road not taken? He asked. Sarah smiled. Always. What if we had agreed to their demands that day? What if we had accepted the quotas and restrictions? Marcus shook his head. Then we would be living in a cage. Comfortable cage, perhaps, but still a cage. And eventually we would have regretted it. Do you think the galaxy is better now? Sarah asked. It is certainly messier, more chaotic. There are problems we never had before. Yes, Marcus said without hesitation. The galaxy is better now. Not perfect, but better. Because species have the freedom to choose their own paths, to make their own mistakes, to learn and grow. That is worth the chaos. They stood together in the empty chamber, 2 humans who had helped change the galaxy. What happens next? Sarah wondered aloud. Marcus laughed. The same thing that always happens. We face new challenges. We make new mistakes. We learn and adapt. But now we do it as equals, not subjects. The next day, Sarah stood on the observation deck of a human colony ship. It was headed to a new system on the edge of explored space. A dozen other colony ships traveled with it. Ships from 6 different species, all working together to settle a new world. The colony would be jointly governed by all 6 species, a true cooperative effort. It would have challenges. The species involved had different needs, different cultures, different ways of seeing the world. There would be conflicts and misunderstandings, but they would work through those challenges together. As equals, as partners. That was the promise of the new galactic order. Sarah watched the ships traveling together through the darkness of space. She thought about everything that had happened since that day in the council chamber. The sanctions, the battle, the negotiations.